First of all, I acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and whose cultures are amongst the oldest continuing cultures in human history. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you tonight to a combined conference opening and an annual lecture. The 12th Biennial Labour History Conference is being hosted by the Canberra Region Branch of the Australian Society of Labour History in association with the National Centre of Biography and the Research School of Social Sciences here at the ANU. 2001 marks the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Society and also the Labour History Journal. It spent 25 years here before moving to Sydney. Tonight's occasion is also the 10th annual lecture sponsored by the ANU Archives Program and the Friends of the Noel Butlin Archives Centre. Earlier this year, Maggie Shapley and I, Maggie Shapley, the ANU archivist, and I realised that we were both pursuing the same speaker. Maggie had asked Senator John Faulkner, on behalf of the Friends of the Noel Butlin Archives, which hosts the annual Archives lecture, to be its speaker. I had done the same as organiser of the Labour History and its People Conference. We decided to join forces and collaborate rather than to compete. It's not surprising that our groups were seeking John Faulkner to be the guest speaker. John has been a senator for New South Wales since 1989. He served as minister in the Keating and the Rudd Labor governments and as Minister of Defence for the Gillard government until September last year. He was a parliamentary representative on the National Archives Advisory Council from 1996 to 2008 and was reappointed last year. He's been an advocate for government accountability through freedom of information and archives legislation and has authored publications on representative government and the history of the Australian Labor Party. In 2001, of course, he was co-editor with Stuart McIntyre of The True Believers, the story of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party, of a century of change and the 607 men and women who made up the Federal Labor Caucus. I last heard John speak earlier this year at the launch of Nick Driveworth and Frank Bongiorno's A Little History of the Australian Labor Party, for which he'd written the foreword. Most recently, he was the author, along with Steve Bracks and Bob Carr, of the report of the National Review of the 2010 election commissioned by the National Executive of the ALP. The review committee received over 800 submissions, spoke with hundreds of Labor Party members, senior figures in the party and the union movement, and throughout the community in Australia. It considered the political consequences of the remade Australian economy. Its report, which was released publicly earlier this year, has far-reaching recommendations. And John, of course, is in much demand to talk about these matters and more generally about the relationship between the past and the present. Given his role as elder statesman in the Australian Labor Party, combined with his long-standing interest in publications in labour history, there are few more qualified than him to be addressing these issues, and especially to a gathering of labour historians and archivists. For indeed, John is a politician who has long been involved with our issues. He's not just a ring-in. As Labor Party leader in the Senate, together with Senator Robert Ray, he was active in supporting the campaign against the closure of the Noel Butlin archives in the late 1990s. He provided generous support to the 2001 conference we held here in Canberra a decade ago, including organising and hosting a showing of political material for the National Film and Sound Archives that he arranged to have collated. He attended the whole conference and chaired a session. He is, moreover, patron of the National Museum of Labour, which we'll be hearing a bit more about from Kim Sadler later. And so we're absolutely delighted that John has joined us tonight to talk on the question of proud past, bright future.
Well, thanks very much, Melanie, and let me too acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here this evening to give the Noel Butlin Archives Centre 10th annual Archives lecture at the Labor History and Its People Conference to mark 50 years since the founding of the Australian Society for the Study of Labor History. It's a great pleasure because I have a long-standing interest in and commitment to the history of the Australian Labor movement and the history of the Australian Labor Party, which of course was conceived as the political voice of that movement. And I have a long-standing commitment to the importance of preserving the traces of our past through archives such as the Noel Butlin Archive Centre. And as you heard from Melanie, I've had a long association with the National Archives of Australia as a member of its advisory council through those very long years of opposition during the life of the Howard government, and then as Minister with responsibility for the archives as Special Minister of State, and now again as a member of the Council. Ladies and gentlemen, the Australian Society for the Study of Labor History and the Noel Butlin Archive Centre have both done extraordinarily valuable work over the years and will without doubt do more in the years to come. They are both organisations with a proud past and a bright future. And the Society and the Noel Butlin Centre are connected by far more than just the interests and enthusiasm of one politician. The Noel Butlin Centre is a repository of documents relating to business and labour. And the Society for the Study of Labor History was created to study the working class situation. Their purposes and their goals have a great deal in common. For archives, ladies and gentlemen, hold the traces and the artefacts of our community's past. Archives show us the ways in which Australians over the decades have had their lives touch the institutions of government, professional organisations, business and labour organisations, and the ways in which their lives have been touched and changed in turn. Archives are places where we see how the stories of Australia's millions of citizens wind together to become the story of a nation. As the National Archives website says, your story, our history. In the National Archives, we can see how the public history of Australia is made up of a mosaic of the private histories of millions of Australians. We're reminded as we stand in the reading room that the nation does not have a life of its own independent of its citizens, but is a continual collective dedication to a sometimes contested idea. Archives remind us that the great narrative of a nation's history does not exist without the myriad personal histories that are part of it. It reminds us that we cannot truly understand Australia's history without an understanding of the history of Australians. histories which provide depth and breadth and context to the decisions of governments, the fluctuations of trade and the economy, changes to laws and regulations and policy. And as this conference, organised jointly by the Society and the ANU's National Centre for Biography, emphasises, with its focus on the role of biography in labour history, the working class situation is one where the stories of working Australians can only be fully understood in the broader context of social organisation, of class and economics. And as we understand better today than perhaps was understood in 1961, of gender and ethnicity as well. Ladies and gentlemen, it has long been a tenet of all political organisation, and I consider writing labour history to be a profoundly small p political act, that the fundamental precondition of social change is the understanding that the circumstances of individuals are shaped by overarching forces that can be challenged and changed. An understanding that those circumstances are not simply the outcome of millions of coincidentally identical bouts of bad luck, spells of bad management or of life choices. It's only by seeing the histories of Australians, working men and women, and our labour activists in full context in relation to each other and in relation to the nation's broader history that their lives can be understood. So the Noel Butlin Centre and the Society for the Study of Labour History are at heart about two different ways of looking at the mosaic of history, of looking at both the detail and the whole, of looking at the detail in the context of the whole and the whole in the light of the detail. Because the broader history of a nation and a society gives context to the lives and struggles of those who lived and live in that nation and that society. And the lives and struggles of those individuals give meaning to the history they have lived through and with. And with only some of those lives, some of those struggles included in any history, that meaning will be a warped and partial one. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear in a little while from Kim Sattler, the Secretary of Unions ACT, about the campaign for a National Museum of Labour. Australia is unusual in Western democracies in having no institution dedicated to collecting the records and the artefacts, to telling the stories of the working men and women who have quite literally built this country stone upon stone, brick by brick. They have shorn the sheep upon whose back Australia was said to ride, made the thousands and thousands of Victor mowers and Hills hoists that symbolise Australian ingenuity and evoke Australian family life. They have laid the rails and built the roads that connect the scattered settlements of this vast continent. They have loaded the ships that take our exports to the world and unloaded them when they return, bringing the world to us. And if our economy today is supported by our mineral wealth, it is because of those Australian workers without whom the coal and ore would never leave the ground. If we are becoming known around the world as an information economy par excellence, it is because of those Australian workers who build and maintain the networks and the servers and the programs that make it possible. For over 2 centuries, working Australians have carried the country forward in their working lives and in their political engagement. It's from the labour movement that so many of the fundamentals of the Australian character and of Australian life have come. The fair go, the safety net, a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. They are Australian values, but they entered Australian life from the labour movement. So did the single constant in Australian federal politics since the nation was created, the Australian Labor Party. The men and women who have, year after year, decade after decade, worked and striven to make their workplace, their community, their country a better, fairer, stronger place, had neither wealth nor power on their side. But their story is the richest and most potent Australia has to tell. That, in the words of John Curtin, through solidarity, unity and selfless devotion to the ideas and ideals upon which the movement is founded, the workers can show the world that a better and more decent way of life can be given to all. Ladies and gentlemen, without seeking in any way to diminish the work of the Noel Butland Centre, Australia should have a national institution dedicated to collecting, preserving and showing the nation the labour movement's past. It's not just about honouring those men and women whose struggles and whose triumphs made Australia what it is today, although they are due our recognition and our respect. Because, ladies and gentlemen, our museums are more than memorials. Our archives are more than accumulations of records. And the accounts of our history are more than annals. The cultural institutions of a nation tell us what that nation values, not just about its past, but about itself. What is recorded, collected, studied and displayed is a choice, although often the politics of that choice are obscured by the dominant values of the day. And those choices are not merely a partial and distorting mirror held up to history. They shape what becomes history itself. We often talk as if the past were unchangeable, and if only we had a clear enough rear-view mirror truly knowable. As if the past were a room in a house we used to live in, but to which we've since lost the key. But time is not distance. The past is not a distant mirror or a foreign country. Its traces surround us. Records, memories, buildings, family stories, banners and badges. But they do not lead us to uncover the real past, because that real past is gone. We do not move past the moments of our lives like passengers on a train, leaving behind landscapes persistent even though lost to view. We move through them, each experience evaporating as it's replaced by the next. So our choice of what to remember, what to cherish, what to preserve, is not merely an exercise in creating a picture of the past. It's not just telling a story about our history, but creating our history in the telling. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is something we have a little experience with in the Australian Labor Party. For the 12 decades of the Labor Party's existence, our debates over the best path into the future have always involved attempts to lay claim to the past. Vere Gordon-Childe is often credited with as the first to complain that Labor was turning its back on its traditions in 1923. But the minute books of the local Labor leagues record similar complaints from almost the point of the party's inception in 1891. Each generation of Labor members and activists chooses their own icons and their own history for it to become their guide and justification. Our weapon of choice in battles against foes within and without the party. As a weapon of choice, it can be a two-edged sword. We are proud of our past, and we have a right to be. Labor has been a political party longer than Australia has been a nation. But a proud history does not guarantee a bright future. A long history does not guarantee a vibrant future. Possessing a great history ought not to mean being possessed by it. And mistaking history for immutable truth obscures not only the reality of the present, but the opportunities for the future. And this is true not only for political parties, but for nations. Ladies and gentlemen, an Australian history that does not have at its heart the efforts and the achievements of the Labor movement, its values and its victories, its failures and its flaws, cannot tell us who we really are as a nation. An Australian history that does not weave into itself the stories of the millions of working Australians who have struggled and sacrificed in pursuit of rights at work and dignity in the workplace hides from view the great struggles of our time to put people before profit and common good before private wealth. And an Australian history that does not centre on the huge accomplishments that working men and women achieved through solidarity and unity leaves us blind to the greatest strength our nation has as we face the challenges of the 21st century. The tremendous effect of collective effort in pursuit of a common goal. Just as Australian Labor history that did not encompass all the men and women who have been part of the long Australian struggle to civilise capitalism would be no guide to us in a new century. A new century of striving to ensure that the labour movement can protect the rights of Australian workers in the face of a capitalism forever changed by the internationalisation of the economy. An Australian Labor history that omitted those who had to fight within as well as without the labour movement to guarantee rights in the workplace and outside it, to turn the commonwealth to the purpose of the common good, to give a better and more decent way of life to all, would leave the labour movement blind to the lessons of some of our greatest leaders and most brilliant campaigns for change. And an Australian Labor Party that does not cherish the full complexity of our past, that does not write into our history the diversity, the disagreements, the marginalised and the minorities in the ALP, cannot rise to the challenges of a new century of politics where the only certainty is change. Ladies and gentlemen, the Australian Historical Community, the Noel Butland Centre, the Society for the Study of Labour History and Australia's labour historians have more than met the challenge of the need for history that casts a wide net, that looks beyond the stories of those whose power and prestige eclipsed others in their time. I do believe the Australian Labor Party can rise to its own challenges, but we must recognise and embrace the complex, multifaceted, ephemeral nature of the past. Recognise that there is no single real history of labour. Embrace the idea of a past that is both too complex and too contested to provide easy claims to authenticity and authority. If we can do so, I believe we will have a future as bright as our past is proud.
I'm Maggie Shapley from the Noel Butland Archive Centre, and thank you, John, for your very inspiring talk. It's good to know that we, and reassuring for us to know that we have a friend on the hill and that there is someone up there who is, has such a passion for history. I hope that you'll be able to accept this gift from the Noel Butland Archive Centre. It's a book everybody needs. It's called Prime Ministers at the Australian National University.